what today represents is something that we've been working toward all summer. We've been, in our science courses and the policy course, we've been studying the subjects of sustainability, whether it's climate science or hydrology or ecology or environmental policy. But just as a carpenter doesn't use a hammer all the time or a saw all the time, they actually try to use the tools in combination. This is the class where we use the tools in combination. And so our goal here is to integrate what we're learning into a problem-solving simulation, which is what this class is about. So I want you to think about these issues, whether it's harmful algal blooms or food or coral reefs or energy or the Long Island Sound, and how much more you know about those issues today than you did the first Wednesday that we met. Now, we're not finished yet because we're doing the science this semester. The next semester, we actually go to my home court, where we talk about policy, politics, and management, which is something that once we understand the issue, how do you make this real? How do you take a program like this and make it real? Now, I should say that at the federal level, there have been no new environmental laws since 1990. We're now a quarter century from the last significant federal environmental law. But at the state and local level, lots of things have been happening. In any case, these issues are continuing to evolve. And as we go through today, listen to what your colleagues have learned about the science of their issue and the problem. Let's learn together, because they have 10 minutes to explain an issue that they've been spending hundreds of hours learning. And I think that's really the other point of this. With all the information we have in the world, that we have to understand, how do you get across these messages quickly? So we will begin quickly with Professor Rosen's group and hear from them on their briefing.
Good morning, and welcome to Hypoxic and Toxic, when microscopic algae create massive problems. I'm Anna Leibowitz, and on behalf of my research team and Professor Rosen, I thank you for your attention. Lake Okeechobee is a 730 square mile lake in southern Florida. It's currently about 90% covered in harmful blue-green algae. This is leading to respiratory irritation, foul smells and sights, and reduced property values. Separately, on the West Florida coast, about 100 miles of water is covered in Florida red tide, Karenia brevis. This has led 15 people to go to the emergency room complaining of rashes, asthma attacks, and eye irritation. It is also killing dolphins, manatees, sea turtles, and other wildlife. Thousands of miles away, 700 square miles of Lake Erie is covered in algae. Toledo, which gets its water supply from the lake, spends $3,000 to $4,000 per day treating its drinking water during these blooms. And even here in New York City, blue-green algae blooms occur in Central Park Lake and other iconic water bodies, posing a deadly threat to dogs that swim in or drink the water. All of these blooms also affect tourism, recreation, and other industries in their areas. Which is what brings us here today. I'll be discussing H.R. 4417, the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Amendments Act of 2017. I'll explain what the bill does, I'll define harmful algal blooms and hypoxia, describe what causes these blooms and their impacts, and describe the solutions and stakeholders. In 1998, in response to a series of harmful algal bloom outbreaks, Congress unanimously passed the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Act. This act accomplished three things. It established an interagency task force to bring together federal agencies working on disparate aspects of this problem. These included the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Environmental Protection Agency, and others. It created an action plan on harmful algal blooms. And it mandated that scientific assessments be presented to Congress every 5 years on these issues. So why do we need an amendment? In short, these problems are getting worse. They are complex, we don't fully understand the causes, and we need to. This act accomplishes it makes 5 additions to the bill. It adds the Army Corps of Engineers to the task force. It defines events of national significance, which allows states and local governments to apply for emergency funding to address blooms. It expands covered water bodies to reflect updated science. It establishes a program website to share information and data with local governments, scientists, and the public. And it allocates $22 million per year through 2023 to fund these programs, and also allows the government to accept private donations to address individual blooms. So what are harmful algal blooms? Algae are mostly single-celled organisms forming the bottom of the aquatic food chain. They're usually benign or beneficial. But when conditions allow, they can bloom explosively, fouling water and harming aquatic life. In addition, about 1% of algal species are toxic, leading to paralytic shellfish poisoning and other human illnesses, and also killing fish and other wildlife. When algae die, they sink and use up oxygen as they decompose, leading to hypoxia, which is water with 2 to 3 parts per million dissolved oxygen or lower, as opposed to the well-oxygenated water that contains about 8 parts per million dissolved oxygen. Hypoxia kills or drives away fish and shellfish. Hypoxia causes dead zones, water with too little oxygen for fish or shellfish to survive. The largest U.S. dead zone forms every spring and summer in the Gulf of Mexico, lasting through the fall. Last year's reached a record 8,776 square miles, about the size of New Jersey. Where do these harmful algal blooms occur? In short, everywhere. Every single state in the country has experienced freshwater or saltwater harmful algal blooms. I'll draw your attention to 3 particular species that are represented on this map. In red, you can see along the west coast and in New England that are large outbreaks of paralytic shellfish poisoning that have occurred over the last few years. In purple along the Gulf of Mexico, you'll notice neurotoxic shellfish poisoning outbreaks. And the green dots in every state represent blue-green algae outbreaks, cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms, which are the freshwater outbreaks we've discussed earlier. And these outbreaks are getting worse. Here is a map of all known outbreaks of paralytic shellfish poisoning in the world as of 1970. And here is that same map as of 2015. Better detection of algal blooms and natural dispersal of algae explains some of this, but not the full picture. Why else are these blooms spreading and getting worse? Blooms occur when conditions allow. Most algae prefer warm, sunny water. And like all organisms, algae need nutrients to grow, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. Excess nutrients run off of land during storms and enter waterways. Major sources include farm fertilizers, atmospheric deposition, animal manure, and urban wastewater. Aquaculture is another way that nutrients can get directly into water bodies. Climate change exacerbates both of these problems by warming water further and by leading to stronger and more frequent rainstorms, which increase runoff. The Mississippi River basin is a prime example of how dispersed nutrient sources can lead to concentrated algal blooms and hypoxia. The Mississippi River basin drains 41% of the United States, including large agricultural regions that use lots of fertilizer and produce lots of animal manure. Nitrogen and phosphorus that is not absorbed by plants enters rivers and travels to the Gulf, where it fuels harmful algal blooms and hypoxia. You can see on this map the concentrations of chlorophyll, which is a measure of the density of algae along the Gulf Coast and the eastern coast of Florida. So why do we care about these algal blooms? Nationally, It's difficult to quantify the total costs of these algal blooms because the impacts tend to be highly local. But in severe blooms around the country, communities suffer multi-million-dollar losses to tourism, commercial fisheries, property values, public health, and public drinking water and other taxpayer-funded infrastructure. In one case study, houses near water made murky from algae were worth up to $80,000 less than similar houses near clear water in the same area. In Florida, harmful algal blooms have become so severe that they are now a major campaign issue in the upcoming midterm elections. The severe local effects explain why our bill allows for the designation of events of national significance and opens federal funding to aid hard-hit areas. Happily, there are many solutions which, if implemented in concert, can greatly reduce harmful algal blooms. One is improving nutrient management on farms to reduce the amount of fertilizer used without reducing crop yields. A second is restoring wetlands to allow runoff to be slowed and nutrients to be absorbed before they enter these major waterways and flow to lakes and coasts. A third is managing urban wastewater, which has been highly successful in recent years. And fourth is monitoring and predicting outbreaks so that we can better prevent them and better address them when they happen. The bill supports all of these by adding more voices to the discussion, by bringing together stakeholders, including government agencies, scientists, and affected communities, and by funding research to better understand the science behind the blooms so that we can best understand how to control them. In summary, harmful algal blooms cause illness, property damage, and environmental destruction. Human activities and climate change exacerbate this problem around the U.S. And our bill, H.R. 4417, funds research, mandates interagency collaboration, and makes funding available to communities so that we can address this problem today and solve it for the future. Thank you very much.